For 25 years, one of the most important countries on Earth was hiding in plain sight. At the heart of Central Asia lies Uzbekistan, a nation of 36 million people, ancient cities, vast natural resources, and a location so strategic that empires have fought over it for 2,000 years. It sits at the crossroads of the Silk Road, between East and West, beside Afghanistan, and at the center of nearly every route connecting Asia. Yet after the Soviet Union collapsed, Uzbekistan sealed itself off from the world. For a generation, it became one of the most isolated countries on Earth. Most outsiders barely knew it existed. Then, in 2016, the doors opened. What the world discovered was astonishing: a young and growing population, rich reserves of gold and natural gas, ambitious economic reforms, and legendary cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. Places that had shaped global trade centuries before many modern nations existed. The story of Uzbekistan is the story of a forgotten crossroads becoming a global crossroads once again. And while most people weren't paying attention, one of the world's most strategically important countries was quietly making its return. Subscribe for more travel documentaries from the most remote corners of the planet, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Uzbekistan is a doubly landlocked country, one of only two in the world that is completely surrounded by other landlocked states. Meaning that to reach the sea from Uzbekistan, you have to cross at least two international borders. It is also, paradoxically, one of the most strategically positioned places on the Eurasian continent. The country's borders touch Kazakhstan to the north, Kyrgyzstan to the east, Tajikistan to the southeast, Afghanistan to the south, and Turkmenistan to the southwest. Its territory covers 447,400 square kilometers, roughly the size of Spain or Thailand, and it sits at the geographic pivot point where Central Asia meets South Asia, meets the Middle East, meets China. The terrain is dominated by steppe, desert, and mountain. The Kyzylkum Desert, the second largest desert in Central Asia after the Karakum, covers most of the country's central and northern territory, a vast expanse of sand and scrub that stretches from the Aral Sea region in the northwest to the foothills of the Pamir Alay Mountains in the southeast. The desert is not uninhabitable. It supports nomadic herding, contains significant mineral deposits, and has been crossed by traders and armies for millennia. But it is unforgiving, and it shapes the way the entire country thinks about water. Water is the defining geographic fact of Uzbekistan. The two great rivers of Central Asia, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya, both originate outside the country, in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and both flow through Uzbekistan before draining into the Aral Sea. The agricultural wealth of the Fergana Valley, the most fertile and densely populated region in Central Asia, depends entirely on irrigation from these rivers. The cotton monoculture that defined Soviet-era Uzbekistan depended on the same water, and the ecological catastrophe of the Aral Sea is the direct result of how aggressively that water was diverted during the Soviet period. The Aral Sea is the most dramatic environmental story in the country, and one of the most dramatic in the world. Once the fourth largest inland body of water on the planet, the Aral has shrunk to a fraction of its original size since the 1960s, as Soviet planners diverted the Amu Darya and Syr Darya to irrigate cotton and grain fields. The former seabed is now a salt desert called the Kyzylkum. The fishing industry that supported dozens of towns along the shoreline collapsed. Public health crises followed, as pesticide and salt residues from the dry seabed are carried by wind across the region. The situation is irreversible at any meaningful scale, although recent efforts to save the northern part of the sea through dam construction have had modest results. The Aral is now the single most cited example in the world of what happens when a state prioritizes short-term production over long-term ecological sustainability. The mountains of Uzbekistan are concentrated in the east and southeast. The western Tian Shan ranges rise along the eastern border with Kyrgyzstan, and the Pamir-Alai system extends into the southern part of the country toward Tajikistan. These mountains contain some of the most dramatic landscapes in Central Asia, including the Ugam-Chatkal range near Tashkent and the Hisar range south of Samarkand. They are sparsely populated, rich in biodiversity, and contain some of the most pristine alpine environments in the former Soviet Union. The climate is continental and arid. Summers are long, hot, and dry, with temperatures regularly exceeding 40 degrees Celsius in the lowlands. Winters are short and cold, with temperatures dropping well below freezing in the north and central regions. Rainfall is minimal across most of the country. Tashkent receives about 400 millimeters per year, Bukhara about 130, and the desert regions even less. The combination of high summer temperatures, low rainfall, and intense sunshine creates the conditions under which the country has built a substantial cotton industry, but it also makes agriculture entirely dependent on irrigation from the rivers. That dependence on the rivers has been, and remains, one of the central political facts of Central Asian geography. The water that Uzbekistan uses originates, mostly, in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Those countries want to develop their own hydroelectric potential, which would reduce downstream flows. The result is a persistent regional tension that has never produced open conflict, but that structures every negotiation between the 5 Central Asian states. Uzbekistan's population, of approximately 36 million, is the largest in Central Asia and is composed overwhelmingly of ethnic Uzbeks, who make up roughly 80% of the population. The remainder includes significant Tajik, Russian, Kazakh, Karakalpak, and Tatar communities, among others. The Karakalpaks, who number about 500,000, live primarily in the Autonomous Republic of Karakalpakstan in the northwest, the region most affected by the Aral Sea catastrophe. The Tajik minority is concentrated in the cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, where centuries of Tajik-speaking populations have coexisted with Uzbek communities in ways that predate any modern national boundary. The population is young. The median age is around 28, and roughly a third of the population is under 15. This demographic profile is one of the country's most significant strategic assets. It means a vast labor force entering working age, a large consumer market developing over the next 2 decades, and a social environment in which the possibilities of reform are constrained by the impatience of a generation that has no memory of the Soviet era and no tolerance for the isolation that defined the immediate post-independence period. The dominant religion is Sunni Islam, practiced by approximately 88% of the population. The remaining 12% is mostly Russian Orthodox Christian, concentrated in Tashkent and other cities with historical Russian populations. Islam in Uzbekistan is, in most respects, moderate and traditional, heavily influenced by centuries of Sufi practice and by the specific Hanafi school of jurisprudence that has historically prevailed in Central Asia. The country has produced some of the most important figures in Islamic intellectual history. Imam al-Bukhari, whose collection of hadith is one of the foundational texts of Sunni Islam, was born near Samarkand in 810 CE and is buried there. The official language is Uzbek, a Turkic language written since the 1990s in the Latin script after decades of being written in Cyrillic under the Soviet Union. The switch to Latin was one of the most visible symbolic breaks with the Soviet past, and it remains incomplete. Russian is still widely spoken, especially in cities, and Tajik remains the first language of significant communities. The linguistic situation reflects the layered history of the region: Turkic conquest overlaid on Iranian-speaking populations, Russian colonization on top of both, Soviet linguistic engineering. The transition from Soviet Republic to independent state was, for Uzbekistan, particularly difficult. The first president, Islam Karimov, ruled from 1991 until his death in 2016, with a combination of authoritarian control, economic isolationism, and brutal repression of any form of dissent. The country sealed its borders, imposed currency controls that made the black market the de facto economy, banned most religious expression, outside state-controlled institutions, and developed one of the worst human rights records in the former Soviet Union. The economy survived, barely, through the export of cotton, gold, natural gas, and a small but significant car manufacturing partnership with General Motors. That era ended with Karimov's death and the rise of Shavkat Mirziyoyev, who became president in 2016 and immediately began a reform program that has since transformed the country's international posture, economic policies, and social environment. Mirziyoyev opened the borders, he liberalized the currency, he ended most of the formal censorship of the internet, he released political prisoners, he initiated a diplomatic outreach that reconnected Uzbekistan with its Central Asian neighbors and with the broader international community. He launched an economic reform program aimed at attracting foreign investment, modernizing the banking sector, and reducing the state's role in the economy. The results have been measurable. GDP growth has averaged 5 to 6% annually since 2017. Foreign direct investment has grown significantly. Tourism has multiplied several times over. The currency has stabilized. The country has rejoined international organizations and signed partnerships with most major economies. Whether the reform program is sustainable, whether it will produce genuine political liberalization, and whether the current government can manage the social pressures of rapid economic change remain open questions. But the trajectory since 2016 has been unmistakably upward. The Silk Road. The Silk Road did not pass through Uzbekistan. It originated there. The network of trade routes that connected China to the Mediterranean for roughly 1,500 years had multiple branches. But the two most important, the northern route through the steppes and the southern route through the mountains and oases, both converged on the cities of what is now Uzbekistan. Samarkand, Bukhara, and Khiva were not stops along the Silk Road. They were, in many ways, the Silk Road. The places where caravans from China, India, Persia, and the Mediterranean exchanged goods, languages, religions, and ideas for centuries before the modern concept of globalization existed. Samarkand is the oldest and most famous of the three. Its recorded history goes back to the 7th century BCE, when it was a Sogdian trading settlement known as Samarkand. Alexander the Great conquered it in 329 BCE. The city changed hands multiple times over the following centuries, between Greek, Persian, Turkish, and Arab rulers, but its position at the intersection of trade routes ensured its continued importance. In the 14th century, Samarkand reached its peak under Timur, the Turco-Mongol conqueror whose empire stretched from India to Anatolia. Timur made Samarkand his capital and invested in it with the particular obsession of a ruler who wanted his capital to be the most magnificent city in the world. The result was a series of monumental structures: the Registan, the Bibi Kanim Mosque, the Shah-e-Zinda, whose blue-tiled domes and towering minarets still define the city today. The Registan is 3 madrasas arranged around a rectangular plaza, each one a masterpiece of Islamic architecture. The Ulugh Beg Madrasa, the oldest of the 3, was built in the early 15th century by Timur's grandson, who was also one of the great astronomers of the medieval world. The Sherdor Madrasa, built 2 centuries later, is decorated with a now iconic image of a tiger chasing a deer across the face of the building, a visual break with Islamic artistic convention that tells you something about the self-confidence of the builders. The Tilia Kori Madrasa, completed in the 17th century, was both an educational institution and a functioning mosque, its interior covered in gold leaf that catches the morning light in a way that has astonished visitors for 400 years. Bukhara, 200 kilometers west of Samarkand, is older in some respects and has been more continuously inhabited. It contains over 100 architectural monuments within its old center, including the Samarkand Mausoleum, the oldest surviving building in Central Asia, dating from the 9th or 10th century, and the Kalyan Minaret, a 47-meter brick tower built in 1127 that Genghis Khan reportedly looked at with such respect that he ordered his troops not to destroy it. Bukhara was one of the great centers of Islamic learning and one of the stops on the trade routes that carried Chinese silk, Indian textiles, and Persian carpets across the known world. Khiva, in the far west of the country, near the modern border with Turkmenistan, is smaller and more isolated, but its old city, the Ichan Kala, is one of the best preserved medieval urban centers anywhere in the Islamic world. Entirely enclosed by a wall, with narrow alleys, blue-tiled minarets, and a population that lived within the walls for centuries, Ichan Kala is the kind of place where a visitor can walk for hours and feel that they have entered a different millennium. These three cities are now, collectively, the heart of Uzbekistan's tourism economy. The number of international visitors has grown from less than 2 million per year before 2016 to over 6 million in recent years. The reflection. In the late afternoon in Samarkand, when the sun drops to the angle that Timur's architects designed for, the light hits the blue tiles of the Registan and turns the entire plaza into something that does not look like a building. It looks like a piece of sky that fell to earth and decided to stay. Tourists stand in the plaza and photograph it. Uzbeks walk through it on their way to somewhere else. Because for them, this is not a monument. It is a bus stop. It is a meeting place. It is the backdrop of ordinary life in a city that has been continuously inhabited for more than 2,500 years. The woman selling pomegranate juice from a cart under the Eastern Madrasa does not look up at the tilework. She has looked at it every day for decades. She knows exactly what it looks like in every kind of light. On the road between Samarkand and Bukhara, the highway crosses a landscape that has not changed much since the caravans first passed through it. The same flat, dry steppe, the same distant mountains to the south, the same horizon that has watched human beings move through this corridor for millennia. The trucks on the road now carry Chinese goods westward and Uzbek cotton eastward, along routes that are functionally identical to the ones that carried Chinese silk westward and Bukharan carpets eastward in the 13th century. The Silk Road is not a metaphor. It is an actual, functioning trade corridor that has simply changed its cargo over time. In Tashkent, the capital, the skyline is changing rapidly. Glass towers are rising. New metro stations are opening. Shopping malls that would not look out of place in Dubai are being filled with Uzbek families who, a decade ago, could not have traveled outside the country without a permit that might or might not have been granted. The city has the particular energy of a place that is, for the first time in a generation, beginning to believe in its own future. And in the cotton fields of the Fergana Valley, the harvest is being gathered by machines rather than by the forced labor of the Soviet era, a change that, while still incomplete, represents one of the genuine human rights advances of the post-2016 period. The fields are still there, the irrigation channels are still there, the same water from the same mountains flows through them, but the system is different, and the people working in it are different, and that difference matters. Uzbekistan is not a country that has arrived. It is a country that is, right now, in the middle of arriving. The destination is not yet defined. The path is not yet clear. The tensions that the reforms have created are real, and the structural challenges that the country faces, water, demographics, governance, environment, will not be solved quickly. But the country is moving. For the first time in 30 years, Uzbekistan is moving with intent, in a direction that its own citizens have chosen, and the rest of the world is beginning to notice. That is what makes this story worth telling now. Not because Uzbekistan has solved its problems, but because it has stopped pretending that the problems do not exist, and because the attempt to solve them is producing something that the world did not expect to see in this part of the map. Genuine, visible, measurable change, happening at a speed that is forcing everyone, investors, diplomats, tourists, analysts, to update their assumptions about what this place is and what it is becoming. The Silk Road Kingdom has been forgotten once. It is not going to be forgotten again. There is a reason travelers, merchants, conquerors, scholars, and dreamers kept returning to this land for more than 2,000 years. Not because Uzbekistan was easy, not because it was rich in the way modern economies measure wealth, but because it sat at the meeting point of worlds. Ideas crossed here, religions crossed here, languages crossed here. Entire civilizations passed through these cities and left pieces of themselves behind. And somehow, through all of it, Uzbekistan remained unmistakably itself. Today, the country stands at another crossroads, not between caravans and empires, but between past and future. Glass towers rise not far from ancient madrasas. High-speed trains connect cities that were once linked by camel caravans. A new generation is growing up with smartphones, global ambitions, and opportunities their grandparents could scarcely imagine. Yet the old rhythms remain: tea shared with guests, bread treated with respect, families gathering around long tables, and cities whose identities were forged centuries before the modern world existed. Perhaps that is what makes Uzbekistan so remarkable. It is not a country trying to escape its history, nor one trapped by it. It is a place learning how to carry the weight of a legendary past while building something new. And as the world begins paying attention again, Uzbekistan offers a quiet reminder. Sometimes the most surprising countries are not the ones that appeared suddenly on the global stage. They are the ones that have been shaping the world for centuries, waiting patiently for the world to look back.